Hi, everybody. This is Nalini Elkins with Industry Network Technology Council, and we are here for the IPv6 trace reading webinar. Somebody please send me a note and let me know that you're hearing me okay. We are recording this webinar, and please, yes, thank you so much. Please let me know if there's any problems during the course of the webinar. And let's just go ahead and get started. So, okay. So this project is, this webinar is being sponsored by the American Registry for Internet Numbers. Thank you so much. And as you know, they have supported us for the last couple of years to do various things, and we very much appreciate that. And the funding is to our nonprofit Industry Network Technology Council, of course, and we work in collaboration with the Indian nonprofit, the India Internet Engineering Society. That's a mouthful. So great. And of course, our vision, as you know, is to actually not just do classes, but get a deployment done. And you know, I'm going to tell you something. We've got people who actually are starting deployment, and we would soon, I promise you, we're going to start doing case studies of them, and that's just what is really, really exciting for me, is to start doing, start showing people who've actually started doing deployment. And if we have played some small part in that, then I am very, very happy to have done that. These are the classes, and we're almost to the end of this session. We've finished all the APNIC classes, and we have this trace reading, and then the next one is troubleshooting. And so a couple words about me, I'll just leave this in. You guys, I won't say anything more. And in this webinar, someone that you know, my partner in crime, Mike Ackerman, he will also be on and throwing comments in once in a while, because I know he loves packet traces as much as I do, and so it's always fun to get his opinion and his experience with some of the things I'm talking about. So this is the agenda, and so we're going to go ahead and this is a very, very detailed level class where we'll talk about quite a few things in the packets, and as we talk about all of these concepts, we will show the packet that goes right along with it. So, but you know, I'll tell you something, is it's one thing to say I can read a trace, but the trace doesn't make a bit of sense to you unless you know the protocol. Once you understand the protocol, then you have a real good idea of how to read the trace. And this is kind of where I've been trying to get you to all along. And I'll kind of summarize, some of the things you should really know, and then we'll see how we use them. That's the idea. These last two sessions are really about where the rubber meets the road, is when you've actually started deploying, how are you going to find problems? Or, you know, not just even problems, is I like to just kind of go through and do packet traces once in a while on my network, just so I see what's going on. And frankly, one is shocked. It seems like everything is going okay, and you're like, really? I had no idea that this piece of software still had a piece left over in it and was communicating to this and that person. Or like, what the heck is this interface doing? So I tell you, is like being very familiar and knowing how to read traces will come in very, very handy. And so I'm going to recap a couple of things really quick, because this is how you want to position yourself in the trace. So the first thing you want to position yourself is, what kind of address type am I dealing with? Is it a global unicast? Is it an anycast? Is it a multicast? And I'm going to do a quick side trip. One of the things you guys might want to do, if you have not done it already, is become a part of the V6 Ops at the IETF, the IPv6 Operations Group email list. And the reason I say that is there's been a huge discussion about Anycast and how one of the Linux versions is not supporting Anycast and what the implications of that are. And one of the things about joining these lists, and you don't have to say anything, you can just lurk, is there's so many people who know so many things about these various topics that you learn an awful lot just by being a part of these email lists. And of course, I know everybody has too many email lists, but I think the V6 Ops one is a very good one to be on. The other thing you want to really keep in mind is that importance of the IPv6 network prefix, as we talked about, because the first thing you want to look at in the trace is the source and destination address. What is it a global unicast? Is it a Linux? Is it a global unicast? Is it multicast? What is it? Is it link local? That's a very important thing to know, because by knowing that, you'll have a real good idea of where, what the packet is. So the other thing to kind of position ourselves is that, remember, TCP/IP has a layer structure, and we're not talking about the physical layer or the link local connection. What we're talking, well, in some ways the link local, but what we're talking about is layer 3 or the IP protocol. So when you look at a trace, by and large, and I say by and large, layers 5 and 4 should be untouched. They should be as you know it. Layer 1 will it completely be untouched. Layer 2, there's some crossover, and in particular, what we call sort of layer 2.5 or link layer, or link local addresses. There's some crossover in terms of that. And of course, having said that, you're going to say, now what about extended passive mode or applications which embed IP addresses? Of course, they should never have done that in the first place. I mean, this is why we have a separation of function. That was never a good idea, and now you see why it was never a good idea. So let's start looking at packet traces. So as I said, what I'm using, of course, is Wireshark, something that I love dearly. It's completely free, open source, and you know what? Do support them. Do support the developers. It is an invaluable tool in being able to let us know what's going on. And it is, of course, one of the most important open source projects ever. And the guys, the core developers, guys and girls, the core developers, and of course Gerald himself are wonderful people, and please do support them. So you can do the same thing. Just download Wireshark if you don't have it already, and start looking at what's going on. But the first thing we're going to look at is, let me get my little highlighter thing out. Okay, so the first thing in the packet trace, as I say, look at the source address, look at the destination address. And of course, because you've been paying attention to the network, the prefix and so on, you'll know this is a link local address, and and this is some kind of multicast address. And then of course you want to start looking at scope and so forth. So then the other thing, of course, what we want to look at, and this is why I say layer 2 somehow it has a role to play is because you'll see that the IPv6 multicast has a different address than a v4 multicast. And that's at layer 2. That's at layer 2. But layer 3, right here, we're going to spend 99% of our time in this webinar on layer 3 and really understanding what that is. Because UDP, TCP, all that should be the same. SCTP, I don't care what protocol, quick, whatever you're going to do, that should be the same. And of course, your application. In this case, of course, in this case, it happens to be the DHCP-v6, which of course is different. But it's really irrelevant, you know, what that application layer is. And you know what? I'm going to take a breath right now and see if Mike, do you have anything to throw in at this point, or shall I go ahead and continue?
Not so much, but let me just say a couple quick things so you can catch your breath. I'm excited for the duration of this presentation. Yes, you spilled the beans. I think packet traces are wonderful. So let me try to sell other people on staying awake and listening to this great stuff. You mentioned this, packet traces aren't always for diagnostics. And I think we sort of lose sight of that sometimes. When things are desperate, and only then do we yell out the packet traces and start trying to look at the bits and bytes, and that's not the only time to use it, and I think you're going to highlight that for us, so let's stay tuned and figure that out. It can also be to understand how things look when they do work, so you have a baseline or a comparison for when they may not be working, so you know whether or not they are and what they should look like. So I think the progression that, Nalini, you're going through here with the webinars, first doing sort of protocol and theoretical knowledge, and now following through with deployment and things like packet traces, where so now we start to, because you mentioned this, you kind of have to have some protocol knowledge at a high level before you start delving into this and doing packet traces. So they kind of feed off of each other. So now that you've given us the other webinars where we have some theoretical and understanding knowledge of the protocol, now we can see what it looks like in the wild or in the real world. And that's when the rubber, as you just said, will really hit the road for us. One more reason to do packet traces is a lot of times when you do them for one purpose, you see a whole lot of other stuff that's going on in your network that you didn't know about that you probably should have. So anyway, that's my message, is don't be reluctant to use packet traces. They have a multitude of benefits. So now it's time for me to take a breath. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. And you know, when you take a packet trace, you may think you just have IPv4 on your network. You're going to be surprised. You're going to be surprised about you know, what else you have. You may have more IPv6 than you think about. So again, let's look at the IPv4 and v6 headers. As I say, we're going to concentrate on IP right now. In the next session, we'll actually take some problems and walk through them, you know, packet by packet by packet. But in this one, I really want you to become very, very familiar with the IP headers. And so one of the things is you're probably quite familiar with the IPv4 header. And so let's think about what's the same and what's different. But and obviously in the main header, you know, the main difference, of course, is that the source address and destination address is quite a bit bigger. But you'll notice too that really the v4 main header is actually more complicated than the v6 main header. And there's some fields which appear to be in the IPv4 main header, which are not in the IPv6 main header. And we've changed a few things. And as we go along, this is you know, we'll talk a lot about this. But of course, the biggest thing, and now I'm going to get an argument about this, but one of the biggest things in the header itself is the address. So this is the first thing, is, as I say, the source and destination address, which in itself, as we just saw, can give you a huge amount of clues about what is it that I'm just about to do here. So here I've gone ahead and put in the parts of the V4 header, and we're really not going to, I just left it so that you have it, and I'm not going to dwell on it, but what I will do is dwell on the V6 header, because this is what we really need to do it. And so here it is. And you'll notice that I keep saying IPv6 main header, because one of the things that we're going to talk about an awful lot in this particular session is extension headers. Because, you know, frankly, that's one thing we have not talked about in these sessions. And if you do not understand extension headers, you will be lost. You will be lost when it comes to IPv6. You need to have it. The main header is required. The extension headers are optional. And it was originally defined in 2460, and there is, of course, a newer version out now. It was actually completely redone. I believe Bob Hendon is still co-author, and he was in charge of doing that. It was redone in the sense that all the things that we now know, have been put into it. But okay, so let's stop and take a look at what is in the IPv6 header. Of course, the first thing is the version, and that's 6. Then you have a field called traffic class. And oh my God, it's like these two things, traffic class and flow label. You know, if you think about all, as much talking that has been done, as many emails or crosstalk going back and forth, these two fields are as much about that as anything else. And so I'm going to just say that things like ECN and quality of service, as well as what is the difference between these, what should actually be in the flow label, those are, as I say, I want to be a little careful because these are ongoing arguments at the IETF, what should be in these and whether it's already being used, who should use them, are they supported, and so on. But you can see why they would be there. Is one wishes to have some type of acknowledgement to distinguish flows. And so these fields, and you'll notice how much real estate they take up. It's quite a bit of real estate, 8-bit for the traffic class and 20 for the flow label. So that's quite a bit of real estate that's being taken up in that. Payload length is the next field. Payload length is the bytes in the extension headers and the payload. And notice it does not include the IPv6 main header length, because that is a fixed header. That is a fixed length. And so none of this is in there. So then the next thing you have is pointer to the next header, which can be either the next extension header or the payload itself. In IPv4, we knew this as the protocol field, but now it is the next header field. Then, of course, a hop limit or TTL, it's the same field, but it has been renamed. So now, why are the headers so different? Well, because the addresses are different. And so what they did, or what the IETF did, I should say what we did, I sometimes, it's one of those things where it's like if you don't agree with it, you say they. I'm kind of teasing. It's like, because I don't, I don't necessarily agree with all the changes, and you'll get that. And don't get Mike started on some of these changes. So if you didn't take some of these fields out, the extent the header could get even bigger. So what the IETF did was created a multiple header structure. They took out some fields, added some, and renamed them. And here's what was done. The unchanged field, and it's used the same way: version, source address, and dest address, and renamed a couple. They're used the same way: traffic class and hop limit, and two that are similar: payload and next one. Flow level never existed in IPv4, and that was added. Now, header length is no longer there because the main header is fixed. And I'll come back to the IP ID flags and fragment offset. I'll move that. I'll come back to that. But you'll notice checksum, IP checksum is eliminated. And that's an interesting thing there. Okay, so let me throw one thing at you for example. Oh, right. So if I take out IP checksum, then what I can do is I can take a packet and I can do something like edit cap or whatever, and I can change the IP addresses, right? And I don't even have to recalculate the checksum to put it back in. You see what I mean? You see, it makes spoofing easier because there's one less thing for me to do. And don't get me now. It's not that difficult. If you're going to go to that length, why not just recalculate the checksum? But that's one thing that, as I say, I'm just throwing out some stuff. But checksum was eliminated because people felt that there are checksums in other areas, and so why have IP checksum as well? As I say, is like and the reason I bring this up is I've just noticed some people spoofing traces, and so you just might want to keep your eye open. If they're IPv6 traces, then you're not going to have that checksum. But then I'm going to actually let Mike talk about the IP ID flags and fragment offset fields. These were moved to a fragment header. And so now let me take a breath and see if Mike would like to opine on whether that was a great idea or not.
Well, no, I guess I need to call IETF they on this particular subject. I'm still chuckling with what you said because a few minutes ago, because it's so true. Well, a lot of us, when looking at packet traces in IPv4 for many years, we did use that field, the PID field, some of us call it. It's basically a packet identifier with a sequence number in there. And the way I found it valuable was in a more complex network situation. If you transit several different middle box types or a NAT boundary or two, sadly, it's a good way to find out what packet on one side of the wall matches the one on the other side of the wall. And when we found out that IPv6 was going to get rid of that, because if you look at the docs in IPv6 in IETF, that field wasn't there for diagnostic purposes. It's there for packet refragmentation, and that's something that you're not supposed to do in IPv6, so it could go away. So there were a few of us that tried to convince the IETF that, hey, you should have that back in there. I don't think everybody agreed. So that's why RFC 8250 or PDM became a reality. So we're reinstating it there. There's many of us that still think it's important. So when you do finally deploy IPv6, you'll want to make sure that PDM capability is on the platforms that you're using to get this and several other really nice benefits back into your bailiwick and your capabilities there. So, Nalini, I hope I said what you were hoping me to say about that subject, and if not, back to you either way.
No, thanks so much. No, that's exactly because IPID, people, they don't have, they were surprised to hear that was the use that many of us put it to. They come from a slightly different background, and but again, we made the case, and now I'll say we. Actually, Mike and I, and I believe one of our co-authors is also on this webinar, and if he would like to say something, that would be great. And so, so we made the case, and IETF listened, and so now we have an RFC. But as I say, and we'll be talking more about that as we go on. But flow label is very interesting. If you guys remember the old SNA world, it's SNA class of service, because the question is, what is a flow? As a flow, for example, is it voice over IP? Is it FTP? And so the idea is that everyone categorizes a flow the same way, and so you get the same kind of priority for that flow. It's a very, very useful concept, but of course, you have to make sure that you're organizing your flow labels correctly, and that everybody on the path actually obeys that. And so that's another interesting thing. And you know what? I know we've kind of yacked about having a lab and stuff that we could all use. And I think it would be wonderful to start manipulating flow labels for various things, and to see if the routers do actually give it priority and stuff. I think that would be a fun case study. And here's a packet with the flow label actually being used. This arrow is kind of blocking some of these things. So let me highlight it for you. Yeah, so here's the flow label that's actually being used. And yeah, so you can see that field. It's an interesting thing to having flow label. And I have talked to some folks who use flow label to quite an extent. But let's talk about extension headers, because we've got quite a bit to cover here, and then we need to get back to actually seeing packets, with extension headers, because this is a complicated area. So one of the real power of, in my opinion, of IPv6 is IPv6 extension headers. It really, in my mind, future-proofs the protocol, because you cannot think of everything in the beginning. So there may be a need for various things which come later by others. And so it's very, very important to have a protocol which is extensible. And this is really one of the strengths of IPv6, is that you can have extension headers. Now, the other thing I'll say is many people block extension headers, and you can see why too. I'm going to show you at the end of this presentation where I crafted some malicious extension headers. It was fun, and it was relatively easy to do. So, and so you can see why people block extension headers. Having said that, I'm going to propose at the very end quite a different way to deal with all this, because as you might expect, Mike and I have our own opinions on how to deal with some of these things. But suffice it to say, let's understand extension headers and what they are. So basically, you can chain them. And so you can say, I have this main header, I'm going to have extension header 1, and after that, that's going to say the next one's 5 and 8, and so on. And it has these extension headers have to appear in a certain order. The one exception to that is the destination options header. And again, and may appear only once. That's the other thing too. And so there are architectural limitations to this, which is of course good. And as I say, it'll all start making a little bit more sense to you once we really talk about what they are. So these are the common ones. There are some others. Okay. So and there's a lot of controversy about all of them. And I'll kind of give you as the children say, the TLDR on these controversies when we talk about, when we see each of them. But these are the common the extension headers: hop by hop, routing, fragments. That's where the IP ID field and fragments got moved to. And then of course your IPsec ones, ESP and AH, and then the destination options that I have talked about and that Mike talked about is where PDM is. So okay, so let's look at an example of chaining. So we got our main header. So then the main header would say, well, the first header that you're going to see is the hop by hop. And then he goes, okay. So then the next one after that is fragment, and then the next one is the TCP payload. And some of this is the same. I mean, you may, if you've stared at traces long enough, you may see that the protocol field is the same. So okay, so now here we go. Now we start feeling comfortable because we're looking at a trace. Here we go. So the first thing we're going to see here is the next header field there. So V6 hop by hop option, and here comes the hop by hop header, and then it says the next header is going to be ICMP-v6. Here comes ICMP-v6 packet. But the first thing we want to do when we start looking at a packet, you'll point yourself to the source and destination addresses. What do we got here? Well, we have ::, which is the unknown address, and it's going to FFO2::2. Now, I have nothing in my life, and so I have memorized all these addresses. So, which I'm sort of teasing, of course, is, it's kind of like the multiplications table. You would do well to memorize the well-known multicast addresses, because what's FFO2::2? It's multicast. It's all routers. So you go all routers within what? My scope. Yeah. If there's anybody on my router, then I want to talk to you. And then what I want to talk to you about, well, that's what it's going to tell you. And so, of course, it's the bulk of it is the ICMP protocol. That's, as I say, we won't go into exactly why you want to talk. That's, as I say, that we do nothing but talk about that. But this is kind of what you want to do is like, who am I talking to and what am I talking to them about? And the controversy about hop by hop option, really, well, there's two things. Is like, and I'm gonna let Mike chime in here too. Is like, if everybody has got to listen, has got to pay attention to this. How is that degradation? And the other thing is, are you going to get thrown into the software path? Are you not going to be able to process everything in hardware and get thrown into hardware? And so a lot of hop by hop is a very, very useful option, but it is very controversial in terms of its use. Mike, you wanna throw a few more things in by hop and your opinion on that?
Well, just a couple things on this slide, because I think there's a couple really important concepts here that you've already highlighted, and I'm just going to sort of restate it because I think it's important for us to try to understand. One is that, looking at the source and destination address, because as you've highlighted, there's differences there. one of the big differences for us is, yeah, the source is the undefined. There's a few different things there, but I think more important, at least in my mind, would be the destination, because you'll see a lot of use of multicast, and then the multicast itself, and this probably sounds pretty confusing on the surface, but if you just pay a little attention to this, spend a little time, it does start to make sense, because there's a couple things in there that, you know, the scope of it. In other words, is it just on the local link, or does it go over the whole internet, or just on the host maybe, and then to what type of device, and as you mentioned, this one's to all routers on the local link. And then, so that's an important concept. And then the hop by hop is, so now we're on the subject that we're really on now, which is the extension header, and the example here is the hop by hop. The hop by hop is pretty important because it will give routers a chance to look at a packet as it's flowing through them as a middle box, and understand things about it, and maybe even communicate that back to you, the network operator. And I don't think we've fully exploited that yet. There's a lot of work at the IETF that's going to do that and is in the process of doing that. And when that all comes to fruition, that'll be a lot of wonderful network management information that all of us operators and enterprises will benefit from. So I think that's it for me. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. You know, because just one example of how hop by hop might be used. This is something that that we have wanted to do is a middle box PDM, which is, you know how useful traceroute is, but what if you could have a hop by hop option that told you, you know, which path you went through? Wouldn't that be wonderful if you knew the path of your routers, and it was the path you took for the actual packet and not for a trace route? And again, that's one of the things that we would very much like to do in a hop by hop option. And then, heaven forbid, if you could get response time information, that's the kind of thing that could be very, very useful. Having said that, it has to be read by every device on the path. And so that's kind of the controversy around that. And again, I encourage you to go to there's a couple of drafts right now, in fact, to make hop by hop usable. Please do read those, and because those will be very, very, I think if we can make it usable, it'll be very, very important. So here's a sample fragment header. You can see here we are. It's fragmentation. This should be a very, very rarely used in IPv6, is the fragmentation header. And so here it is. And again, if you've seen fragment headers in IPv4 or fragmentation, basically, this is essentially what you've got here is, you know, what's the offset, more fragmentation, and so on. All this stuff used to be in the main IPv4 packet, but now here it is in an extension header. But remember, let's have some discipline, and we'll start first off. Okay, what's the source address? Well, it looks like global unicast. Destination, again, global unicast. Okay, bingo. Let's take a look. My goodness, looks like they're using flow label also. So I guess what I'm saying in this thing is, like, if you, when we were talking about learning an awful lot about your network, this is how you start learning. You're like, it's like, say you may not even know what all your applications are doing or what your network. You're like, oh goodness, looks like we use lots of flow labels, a lot more than I thought. And you know, as I say, it'll ease your time in trace reading if you do this. Now, one more thing about fragmentation. Remember, this is not the V4 world. You're not going to be doing no fragmentation at routers. It is only at the originating host. And so now you can see why this should be so rare. So now let me digress a tiny bit and talk about another layer violation, which offends me greatly. I guess I will call it they. So each layer is not really supposed to know about other layers. And so having said that, TCP does. TCP will not fragment. And you guys, if you have a trace with showing me different, please send it to me, because this is my experience. TCP is not going to fragment at the originating interface, because he knows what your source interface is. So but should he? Now, have we not just jumped layers? So is TCP supposed to be thinking about what my interface, my MTU size is, or my interface size? No, right? But he does. And so TCP is not going to do source fragmentation. So if you're seeing a fragmented packet, I tell you, I have never ever seen a TCP packet source fragmented. Again, if you have one for me, please send it to me. I am happy to be wrong. So what you left with is UDP, right? Or SCTP, or some other thing, some other protocol which is doing source fragmentation. And remember, you can't be fragmenting at routers. It's only at the originating host. Okay. So now let's talk about destination options. Destination options is supposed to be read only by the source and destination end host, not by anybody in the middle. So let's take a look at that. So here's a destination option. Highlight it for you. Here we are. This is an old destination option in mobile IPv6. We should do a destination options, because PDM is a destination option. And once we get a little further along, we'll do a destination options, just a whole PDM thing about encryption, PDM version 2, and so forth, because that's destination options too. Very, very useful to have destination options. And these are all described. Okay, so let me erase, get back to normal drawing mode. Let me move along a little faster. I don't want to run out of time. I want to show you some of the other things. So here it is. Here's you'll also get from RFC 2460. You'll get a discard packet too. Here's another, because it's a destination option here, and this is unknown. It's an unknown payload in here. Here's another packet. This is kind of interesting. You're like, 3001. What the heck kind of packet is that? And the packet that's in here is the old source routing packet type 0. This is a routing header packet, and source routing packet 0 is deprecated. And I'm trying to remember whether this is whether this is an address I made up. I think that's likely. It's likely, because the old I think there was an old V6 bone, the old test packets had some very weird addressing too. So the point of this little digression is that just because something is deprecated doesn't mean you can't use it. There's no protocol police. It should be dropped in routers or dropped in OSs. Is it really? And I've certainly seen OSs send out all kinds of even deprecated addressing, like site local unicast. Site local unicast is deprecated, and I've seen it being sent out. Routing header 0 is deprecated, and you'll see it going out. It was deprecated because you can create routing loops on it. And here it is. And I'll show you the routing loop and my crafted packet in there. The other extension headers you'll see a lot is for IPsec. Now, the IPsec headers, ESP and AH, those should look familiar to you if you've done IPsec, because they were back-ported. ESP and AH were back-ported to IPv4, and they are essentially the same. And of course, as I say, this is not an IPsec thing. I mean, you know, I actually have I don't like, I'm only joking. Like you can talk about IPsec for an entire day, but so let's just briefly go past the IPsec headers, the authentication, and the encryption header. And you can have AH only. And notice that this says, you know, this is saying that the data itself is not encrypted. It's just authentication. So it's not necessarily encryption. And so this is a packet with AH, and you notice it's an OSPF packet. So isn't that interesting? And so you'll see here that's on these extension headers, and the way they're chaining is going to tell you an awful lot about what is in that packet. So I'm going to show you some malformed packets. As I say, you know, manipulating packets for fun, right? Because just because, you know, someone says you can't do it, doesn't mean you can't do it, right? And so it's easy enough to craft packets, right? And so here's one that I did. I crafted a packet with a bunch of with multiple headers, a bunch of deprecated headers, and you know, and a routing loop. I mean, look at this. I'm making it go to the unknown address. Seriously, this is what I'm doing. And so, you know, and it's like the question is like, just because you're not supposed to do it doesn't mean you can't do it. And what the heck kind of address is this? 7,000 and so on. So it helps a lot to know, you know, what you've got, you know, and so how extension headers should be done, and what makes them invalid. And again, this is why a lot of people don't want extension headers on their network, is that it's complex, and and whether everyone has it correctly as far as understanding and obeying all the rules is a good question. And that's all the firewalls and everything else. And then how much damage can be done. And I'll just say one small note. And Mike and I will do a whole presentation on PDM version 2, which we actually hope will provide encryption, not just for destination options and for PDM, but for extension headers in general, because they're so useful and really is some of the power of IPv6, and we need to have them be usable. So that's just our opinion on all of that. So I'm going to show you real quick some of the things which we have totally not talked about, which is the 6LoWPAN and the IoT type stuff. Again, it's like you can spend days and days and days talking about IPv6 over compressed low power IoT kind of devices and header compression, routing, and all of that. Let me just show you a quick packet. And I'm going to give you a super caveat here. I do not keep up with 6LoW and all the IoT areas. And so this is a very dated packet. It's just to kind of give you an example that one, you can get the packet traces, Wireshark will decode it, and just to give you an idea of kind of what the kinds of things you're going to see. And in here, what you're going to start seeing is things like, in your UDP packet, you're going to see things like Zigbee encapsulation and 6LoWPAN, you know, inside of that. But you notice too, interestingly enough, this is all embedded inside V4. Isn't that interesting? It's like you've got this is a nightmare of a packet you know, to look at. Because the other thing too is like, so okay, say you're an intelligent firewall, like, good Lord, you got your job cut out for you, right? In terms of figuring out what part of the packet is valid and invalid, in all this. And you got to do this in real time. You got to do it right away, to get all this. So now I'm going to take a breath because I think we may be coming to the end here. Thank God, right? And let Mike get a word in edgewise. I've talked about an awful lot of stuff. And Mike, if there's any particular slide you want me to go back to, I can do that too.
No, I think I just have a general comment or really question for everybody out there. First off, this was an excellent presentation, a lot of new concepts, and all of us enterprise operators are all intimidated with more that we need to learn, but I think you've highlighted how important it is, and hopefully we're motivated to learn it. So one of the things I wanted to ask is, you've covered extension headers, and that's going to be an important new concept that we need to familiarize ourselves with, but it'll be worth it because there's a lot of potential benefits on there. And so I think as people learn a little bit more about this, ask questions if you have time for questions today, or over email to Nalini, because she's the true authority on this. But do we want these things in our networks? Because right now a lot of firewalls and other security devices will throw them away kind of by default, but there's a lot of value there, so we need to make them more usable. Things along the lines of PDM2 and other initiatives that are going on at IETF will make that happen, but we need to let everybody know that they are of value. We do want them, and we want you to help us make them work better and become more viable in our networks. So again, that's a question, and ask questions so that you can answer that question better, because I have a feeling that we've thrown a lot at you today. I know a lot of this is new to me, and we just need to learn it more and find out how we can best leverage it in our network. So that's point one. Let Nalini know how important extension headers are, and maybe we want to do a webinar next year or something. Nalini, I'm not selling you down the river here, I hope, but on EHs, just a whole webinar on EHs. So that might be the type of answer you give back as well. And then one more thing I want to say real quick is you covered real briefly 6LoWPAN and other sort of newer, compressed, reduced protocol versions of IPv6. And I, like Nalini and many others, have sort of ignored that for a while. But as IoT becomes more prevalent, and we want more devices in our networks that aren't fully capable, fully network managed, and don't have the power, the capability, the memory, the horsepower, whatever, that may become more important and more prevalent. So give us some feedback there too. I see that happening, and I think that's an area we're going to have to expend more energy and understanding in. And that's it for me, Nalini. Thank you.
No, thanks so much. I've left a couple of these slides in for you guys. You've seen them before. Just so you review them and go back to them. It's like really memorize your multicast scope and your multicast groups, because you'll see, like, here's another sample packet, going into FFO2 : C : Charlie, and here you can, learn to, get over to the multicast. This is where it's all defined, and that link is there for you. Go and see what there is. But what I'm thinking, I had that in my head. But to get back to what Mike was saying too, is like, I think next year, I'm going to see if we can get some of the folks who work in 6LoW, like Karsten, and of course Michael Richardson, some of the folks over there who really specialize in that. I mean, there's a lot of people. I know there's a bunch of people in India who actually do a lot of work in IoT. But as I say, Karsten, wrote quite a bit of all that stuff. And so I think he would be best, or people like that. The people who wrote these drafts would be best, or RFCs, I should say. They would be best to to talk about this stuff, because as I say, I want to stick to things that I feel very, very comfortable in saying. And as I say, we've got that's, again, I can't say enough about the IETF. As I say, I try to disown parts where that I don't support, but it's actually absolutely wonderful. Some of the most interesting and smartest people I've ever met, and some of the kindest too, often, and let's just get them on to talk. Yeah, so there's a couple of questions. So if you guys have questions, we've got 2 or 3 minutes for questions. And so I'll so we can take that on. So any questions, and I'll give you some of the ones that I've gotten in. Is one was of course, like, what Linux version is not supporting Anycast? Question. Sure, I'll send you the link to that particular or that particular thread, so you guys can take a look at that. And what I'll do, and because of the next one, is which email list were you talking about? And that's the V6 Ops email list. When I send out the things, then I'll send you the link to that too. The one 6-man and V6 Ops. 6-man is the email list for actual protocol changes to IPv6, and then V6 Ops is operational. Both of those are real good to keep up on. And 6-man is the one where you'll see the new stuff on extension headers and the hop by hop and so on. And I hope this, trace reading is such a broad field, and it's so inextricably tied in with the protocol that it's hard to know how to bound it to something useful. And so I hope you got something useful out of this. We have one more question. Interesting. So V6 extension headers can be a source of security risk, but they can also be used to enhance security, such as with DNSSEC. Sure. No, I think V6 extension headers are extremely useful. And you know what? I'm going to have Mike talk again. And Mike, do you want to talk a little bit about, because we've got 2 or 3 minutes, about PDM version 2 and what we're trying to do with that, and how potentially that could be used for extension headers?
Yeah, sure. And the most important thing I can say is whoever asked that question is right on. It's a double-edged sword. There's a lot of capability there. We just need to find out how to use it effectively, safely, and securely. So along those lines, PDM is wonderful, I think, and will provide a lot of great information. But then people raise the same issue, like, well, what if nefarious people can grab that information as well? It's not encrypted, and then they can use it against us. Personally, I think that's somewhat of an overreaction because of the type of information there. But experts have shown us and told us that there are ways you could use that type of information against you. And so what Nalini and others are doing now is finding a way that will fit into our networks and not cause us a lot of disruption, overhead, or other issues, and yet will encrypt the PDM data. And that same mechanism can be used to encrypt, if we want, other extension headers, hop by hop and all the other ones that she mentioned. So that's pretty wonderful. And here's what I really like is that for a lot of that stuff, if I'm using it just in my own network, I don't need to encrypt it and go through all that overhead and complication and aggravation. But if it's going over the internet, or maybe even some intra-core private networks, I may want to. So what Nalini's building is selectable. You can use it on a flow basis or a session basis and encrypt it on some and not encrypt it on the others. So those are the directions that we're trying to move in to make this usable and safe and yet still valuable. And so I think that's going a long way to answer that great question that whoever just submitted that was intending.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mike. Because I think, the challenge is to have encryption without additional latency entity and cost. You know, it's very, very tricky doing that. And so I think what we'll do is we'll do an entire session on our approach for that. But we're at the end of the hour. Thank you all so much for your questions. And as always, you will be getting a recording of the session as well as the foils. And the next and last session in this series will be on actual problems. We'll take a few problems and walk through them. So thank you so much, and I hope to see you at the next session.
Nalini, can I just say one more thing and let Nalini know if this was a great session, if this is the kind of stuff you like, and if you have thoughts on what you might like next year, if we can talk her into doing some more. Thanks, Nalini. Thanks, everybody.
Yes, please. Yeah, thank you so much. Please, yeah, whatever you guys want for next year. And one of the things I know already is I'm trying to twist some arms of some folks who are actually starting to deploy. And I think, you know, because I'm tired of hearing myself talk, you know, let's get some other folks on. So thank you so much.